Good evening, everyone, and welcome to Political Forum. My name is Mike Jacobson. I want to thank you all for joining us tonight. Illinois State Rep Lindsey LaPointe of the 19th District. Thank you for being on tonight's show.
Thank you for having me.
All right, folks, so now this is your chance. You know that Political Forum is your chance to speak with elected officials that represent areas in the city of Chicago. So now is your chance to talk with them, to engage. You have a phone number at the bottom of the screen, 312-738-1060, 312-738-1060. You can also see us right here, right now. Obviously, we're on KNTV 21. But you can also watch us live online at kntv.org/hotline. So tell your friends that they can check us out, and also tell your friends to engage with us because we look forward to your questions. Okay, so you are fairly new to the scene in Springfield, so why don't you, off the bat, for folks who may not know much about you, why don't you just explain yourself?
Sure. First of all, thank you for having me.
Sure.
I love CanTV, and I'm a frequent watcher of CanTV Online
Love
for all
it.
the great community events that I miss when I'm out and about.
KNTV.org/watch, people.
That's right. So I am 5 months into this job as state representative, and I come to this work through the field of social work and human services. And I did that work for about 9 years, and I loved it. I was making a difference in people's lives every day. But I was hitting structural issues. And I did that work here in Chicago at various places in youth development, child care assistance, and housing and homelessness. And I moved into the policy world. And I worked in state government, and then I worked at a nonprofit for 2 years. But I began to see how if you want to pass good policy, you have to engage in political work. And I fell in love with political work. I got really involved in my own community on the far northwest side of Chicago. And when we were anticipating an opening in the General Assembly, I decided to throw my hat in the ring to be considered.
So I'll tell you something, those are two different things. It's one thing to work, talking about policy making, but it's another thing to actually then be in office. Because that's, we were talking a little bit beforehand before we met there, that's a big transition, and because it's not all roses, and great things. So did you have that itch? Was there a little itch, inside of you that said, I want to do this?
Oh yeah. I mean, it was a big decision, but at the end of the day, I was spending time trying to get legislators at the local level to do certain things. So when it popped up that I could actually be that legislator, I really couldn't say no.
All right, so we've got a lot of things to talk about. Obviously, you've been since you've been in office. But one thing that I think we got to hit off right off the bat is news that's broken the last day or two, talking about a Be Easy story about an email from a Springfield lobbyist to the Speaker, Michael Madigan, that mentions a cover-up of a rape in Champaign and also ghost workers. Madigan, he came out today and released a statement saying he had no knowledge of the incidents that's been referenced. And today, your colleagues, you are saying, hey, this needs to be investigated. So what can you say today?
Yeah, well, first of all, we all need to have so much gratitude for our local media. And this would not have broken if it weren't for WBEZ and if it weren't for in-depth journalism. And in so many instances, especially here in Chicago lately, it's that in-depth journalism that is actually going to change policy and change lives, frankly. So thankfully we have journalism. But the content of that, I saw that last night, and it is horrifying. And it just speaks to the fact that there are too many instances, because that email wasn't from yesterday. I mean, somebody saw it. I think it was 2012, if I'm not mistaken. There's so many instances where people just look away and don't hold people accountable. And that's what creates a toxic environment in our government and politics, which we have in places around the country, but certainly here in Chicago and Illinois. And what that ends up doing is keeping people away. And I hear that from my constituents a lot. There's some cynicism out there about the state of government and politics. And I can understand that cynicism. And this is what we saw in the news yesterday and today is a part of that. So we need to start saying no and holding people accountable in the moment.
Actually, I'm going to go on there and talk about cynicism because you're absolutely right. It seems, it's this from the top down, from the White House all the way down to the local level municipalities. It seems that there is now a lack of trust that voters feel towards their elected officials and towards other elected officials, and especially if that elected official maybe is a party that they did not vote for. And now this is your realm. What do you say to that, and how do you help move the ball forward, move the communication forward? Because in the end, we're all in this together.
Yeah, well, I talk about my story, and I'm actually pretty new to, relatively speaking, to politics in Chicago and Illinois. I lived in the city of Chicago for 9 years before I did any political work. But once I turned a corner and really felt obligated to get involved, to get people I believed in elected, there was no going back because I felt really empowered. And I share my story with people so they know that I understand feeling alienated from the process and feeling cynical, but there's a lot that can happen when you decide to step up and actually get involved. But I end up doing a lot of listening to and just empathizing with people that I understand why there's that cynicism out there.
Thank you for that. It looks like we have our first caller of the night. Caller, are you there? Do you have a question or comment?
Yes, I was just wondering, I've heard some conversation at the state level about bail reform, and I'm not very educated on the subject, so I was wondering what are the alternatives to cash bail that are being discussed?
Bail reform.
That's a great question, and that's something that we've heard a lot about in Cook County, but it's also a conversation that we have had a bit at the state, and we can have it more at the state. So in a system of cash bail, basically when somebody is charged with a crime, they are detained at the county level, and a bail is set. And if that person can pay that bail, then they do not have to spend their pretrial time detained in county jail. And if a person is not financially capable of paying that bail or bond, then they stay detained. So what we actually have in the county jail system is most people, upwards of 90% in any given county jail, are actually there pretrial innocent until proven guilty. I believe that somebody's ability to pay should not be how we determine whether they should be detained or not. And there are other ways to make that decision. There are risk assessment tools out there that make assessments on somebody's risk not to come back to court, somebody's risk for violence, and I advocate that those other tools are better than just somebody's ability to pay.
Thank you for that question, caller. I appreciate that. Okay, so to go along, there's obviously other news. One of the biggest news so far, January 1, was hit January 1. All of a sudden, we had legalization of marijuana and marijuana sales. Most of the news has been positive. What have you heard, and what have your constituents been telling you?
Great question. The news has been very positive, and this is really a landmark piece of legislation. Illinois is the only state to legalize cannabis through a legislative process. All of the other 10 states that have done this have done it through a referendum question. So that means we got to work out a lot of the details in advance and really figure out what are those really important points of revenue, social equity, and public safety. So we did a lot of the work in advance. Most of my constituents are actually really pleased, and most people see that this is a very critical component of revenue. A few people have questions, and I've actually had a lot of people having questions lately asking where is the revenue going, and thankfully, because we went through a legislative process and worked out all the details in advance, we know exactly where the revenue is going. And I was just so pleased to see that in the first 5 days of our legalization, we had almost $11 million worth of sales.
That's I heard the same thing. It was like unbelievable. And the one blowback that I've heard is concerning the taxes. Like and so people are like, why? What was? And so you're just talking about that's where the money's going to. So what is when you're talking about those tax dollars? What are they going to?
Good question. So I'm not going to get all the percentages right,
yeah, right.
And I make sure to put that up on my social media so constituents can have access to that. But a portion is going to go to pay our backlog of bills. I know a pretty big portion is going to go to our general revenue fund for the state budget. A portion is going to go to a public health, public awareness campaign. Part of it is going to go to law enforcement to make sure we continue to detect the black market, because the goal is to diminish the black market. And then a significant amount of the funds, and this was a really big part of the social equity component, are actually going out in grant programs to the communities across Illinois that are most harmed by the war on drugs. And those funds are earmarked for anti-violence programs and economic development programs.
Right. Okay. Yeah. But again, it seems like smooth going. Especially that first day there was like hour-long lines to those different dispensaries, but
yeah, and actually right in my district, about 4 blocks north of where I live, we have one of the dispensaries, and I've driven by a few times in the last few days, and every time I've driven by, there's been a long line.
Yeah, so something else. So that'd be very interesting to see how that process moves along as we go along, during the years and the coming years.
Absolutely.
So, all right, folks. So again, we have State Rep Lindsey LaPointe of the 19th District with us. I just want to quickly show her contact information for you if you need to get a hold of her. There it is. So phone number 773-647-1174 and the email replapointe@gmail.com. Okay, so the last piece of information, looking at the state, and this came out just recently, was also talking about the red light cameras and the tickets that are going along with that. The Illinois Comptroller recently stated that she and the office will no longer assist municipalities in collecting the fines. She's calling the system both unfair and plain rotten. I know that there's been a lot of things, especially on Springfield, where people are pointing fingers and people have resigned. So what's your take on the red light camera and what the comptroller's doing?
I think the comptroller made the right decision, and it just shows what you can do when you are a strong leader and you come out and you say this is what needs to happen, and you use your podium to do that. I know that these red light cameras were supposedly about safety, but there's been ongoing questions about, is this really about safety or is this about generating revenue? And of course, we need revenue in Illinois, no question, but the allegations that we're seeing in the news, which are very related to our ongoing cynicism about government and politics, have raised to the top some real questions about if this is really about public safety.
Wonderful. Okay, so now moving forward, we are about 2 months away already, can't believe it, from the March primaries.
We are.
So you've already lined up some endorsements, in your short time in office. So what are you doing right now? Obviously, beating the drum, and going on the streets. What are you doing to get your name out and to continue to get your message across to the constituents in your district?
When you're running for office, it's all about meeting voters.
Yeah.
And I represent a very big district, about 108,000 people. But it's a district that has a lot of single-family homes, which is not every district in Illinois. So when you're campaigning for office in the 19th district, we are lucky because we get to meet people on their doorstep, which is honestly the best part of campaigning, but it's also a really important part of being a good representative, because I can't be a good representative if I'm not hearing from my constituents about what matters most to them. So when you are running a campaign, you are, the two big things that you're doing are knocking doors and meeting constituents, and you're also raising money. And we unfortunately still live in a time where you need a significant amount of money to be successful when you run for office.
Excellent point. This was just recently in the election for governor. I mean, looking at the money pouring into both sides of those campaigns, it took out every single other person, because there's no way that anyone else could amass that amount of money that Governor Pritzker did, and Governor Rauner did. And so I bring that up. Is that an issue that needs to be addressed?
Absolutely. Absolutely. It's going to take some time, but campaign finance reform will open up the doors and allow more people into our government and politics. And I think that's exactly what needs to happen. And I have to say, because I started my career in social work, and I have done a lot of work with people who are our most vulnerable and truly at rock bottom, who never have $100 in their hand. It's hard and disheartening to know that one has to raise so much money to run for office, and we are spending millions of dollars on any given campaign when there are so many needs on the ground in our communities across Illinois.
Right, especially because one of the things that's near to you is mental health, is the schools, is healthcare, is supporting teachers and first responders, and yet so you're saying like that's where the reform needs to come in, because that money, instead of going towards these campaigns, could go towards some of that pie.
Yeah,
right?
That's absolutely right. That's absolutely right. And kind of mental health in particular, I care deeply about that, making it more accessible, making it more affordable, and making sure we destigmatize. And I've met a lot of people recently who have a lot of difficulty navigating the special education system in schools. But also I've been meeting a lot of parents who have young adult children who struggle with mental health issues, and they're still on their insurance, but parents have a lot of concerns. Well, what happens when my young adult child is no longer eligible for my insurance? And it's not just mental health. The other kind of really big issue that we have that was actually highlighted by the Tribune today, and a lack of funding really holds us back, developmental disabilities is a huge issue. And I was disheartened, but also fired up to learn today that, and frankly I wasn't surprised, that Illinois ranks last in terms of our support for people with developmental disabilities. And there are 20,000 people on a wait list to get those state-funded services. So that is a huge problem, and clearly that's going to take a financial investment.
And this is something near to your heart, being that your experience in social work, but you know that in the city of Chicago, like with the previous mayor administration, like dropping out all of those mental health facilities, all that help, and you're absolutely right, there is a stigma when it comes to people who are suffering from mental health, people who are suffering with some sort of disability, and they're ostracized, from the community, and something needs to be done to turn that around, because as you said, there are people in need of help.
Yep, absolutely, absolutely. And it's kind of a twofold issue, getting beyond the stigma so somebody builds the motivation to access treatment. And of course, we have deep stigma when it comes to substance abuse as well.
Yeah.
And then once somebody's ready to take that step and seek out treatment, if they then can't access it, that really shuts down their motivation to seek treatment again, frankly. And I was doing street outreach actually in Portage Park, which is part of my district now, back in 2012. And this was before we passed the Affordable Care Act. So this was at a time where if you were a single adult with no children and very, very low income or no income, there was just no way for you to access Medicaid. Which means there's no way for you to access care. And I remember working one-on-one with a woman who was struggling with heroin, and she was finally ready to access treatment. So we got on the phone, we called the nearest treatment provider, and they did not have any beds left that would normally be covered by DASA, which is the Department of Alcohol and Substance Abuse at the state, and she had no other coverage, so she could not access treatment after finally building up the motivation and having a candid conversation with me, the outreach worker, that's what she needed, so she wasn't able to access that treatment.
So definitely something that needs to be addressed. Okay, so since you've been appointed in July, by the way, you're the first woman to hold this seat, correct?
I am, yeah, I'm very proud of that.
So let's talk about what you've accomplished so far in your time.
Sure. Well, first I want to talk about the big issues that matter most to
Sure.
my constituents. Because the first order of business was to do a lot of listening. And part of that is I didn't get elected, I got appointed, so I
Yeah.
didn't go through a previous 8-month process of a lot of voter contact. So spend 5 months doing a lot of listening, and what I'm hearing from constituents in the district in terms of what they care about the most are things like affordable and accessible healthcare, including mental health care. That comes up a lot in conversations. Supporting our teachers and first responders, making sure they have fair contracts, stable retirements. Mental health of our first responders is something that's coming up again and again. And then the biggest issue that I'm hearing about is the burden of property taxes on homeowners. It's times a million. That is the biggest issue that my constituents have. So those are the big issues. And I already got to go to Springfield. I was there during the fall veto session. And in the spring, before I got there, it was really a landmark session. And my colleagues and the governor got a ton of stuff done that I was very happy about. But we also got a lot done in veto session. And I was very proud to take some votes that I know are going to have a very positive impact on my constituents. So I'll just share a few of those things
Sure.
because we do good stuff in Springfield, and I want people to know that. Downstate police and fire pension consolidation was a big bill that passed that the governor and a task force had done a lot of background work on. And at the end of the day, that is going to save the state money, and it's going to get us a lot more in our return on investment in terms of where we're investing our dollars. So that was really important. We made some refinements to our cannabis legalization bill, and we've talked a little bit about that already. But it was really important to make those refinements so we could get the most impact. And again, public safety, social equity, and getting the right amount of revenue. And then we actually passed a really important bill related to public sector labor protections that affirms some collective bargaining rights and protects employee data. So I could go on and on about the things we actually got accomplished in a pretty short time frame in October and November when I was in Springfield, but I will leave it at that. But I was really proud to vote yes on those things.
So now let's move forward, looking ahead, 2020 and beyond. But besides that you have the primary in March, that doesn't stop you from still working, the district. So what are you working on now? What do you see yourself working on in 2020?
Yeah, well, I got some really great committee assignments, and that's where a lot of the work in terms of legislation takes place. And I think my assignments are a great fit for me and a great fit for my district. So I'm going to be doing a lot of work on the mental health committee. I'm going to be doing a lot of work on the labor and commerce committee and the energy and the environment committee. Also, elementary education committee. And a big issue that we're going to be working on in Springfield very shortly is an issue we had a big subject matter hearing on yesterday, and it was on the front page of the Tribune this morning. And the issue is the use of seclusion rooms in schools around Illinois for students that are struggling and having outbursts who need to calm down. And the idea is that these seclusion rooms, the intent, should only be used for safety reasons. And what a big ProPublica Illinois story broke in November is that there are many schools around Illinois who are using these seclusion rooms for things related to discipline. And again, I am so thankful for local in-depth journalism. The work that journalists do is clearly related to better public policy. This hearing yesterday was very moving, and so my colleague, Representative Jonathan Carroll, has introduced a bill related to eliminating the use of seclusion in Illinois, and I look forward to working on that with him. What we learned yesterday is that most other states don't use seclusion rooms, so we know it can be done. What we also learned is Chicago Public Schools doesn't use seclusion rooms. And so what I'm left thinking is, if one of the biggest school systems in the state of Illinois that arguably is overburdened and has a lot of kids with special needs, if that system doesn't have to use seclusion rooms, there has to be a better way for other school systems in Illinois.
I hear you there. Absolutely. There's other we're running out of time. I have a couple minutes left. There's two things that I also want to talk about. Number one, gun violence and safety. That's another thing that I think is on the top of mind for a lot of people. Probably a lot of people in your district and a lot of people in the city and in the state. What can you talk about that? What have you done? Do you see anything on the horizon?
Public safety is always an issue. It is always an issue, and I think it's always an issue because when somebody is victimized, that is a very real thing.
Yeah.
And overall, in the country, and certainly in Chicago and Illinois, crime is down. Now, that doesn't bring a lot of comfort to somebody who's just been victimized.
Right.
And I actually have talked to a lot of people that have been dealing with property crimes lately. But I do like to kind of bring out the facts and just remind people that crime is down. We have a serious gun violence problem in the city of Chicago. Anybody knows that. And I believe that one of the key ways to combat gun violence is through investments in communities that currently don't have a lot of opportunity. So it's a combination of making sure we have the right laws in place to cut down on gun trafficking, but also making sure we're taking a public health approach to gun violence and investing in the communities that have the least amount of opportunity, because that is what drives a lot of the violence.
And the last question, I thank you for the last question, is also the capital funding spending. So where are we on that? I know that looking at roads, bridges, and more than that, but what can you talk about that moving forward for 2020?
So we passed a landmark capital bill before I got to Springfield, and a lot of the legislators, myself included, I'm working with my colleague on the other side of the chamber, Senator Rob Martwick. We are working to get those capital dollars out into our districts. And it can't happen soon enough because I drive on the roads, my constituents drive on the roads, and it's not safe. And bridges in particular are something that we really need to deal with. So we're doing our best to get that money out the door as soon as we can.
All right. Representative LaPointe, thank you so much for being on the show today.
Pleasure to be here.
Thank you. And also thank you all the viewers who've watched and the caller called in. Again, this has been Political Forum. Every Wednesday at 7 p.m. is your chance to speak with an elected official, civically engaged person within the city of city of Chicago and the state of Illinois. I want to thank you all again for watching. And until next week, everyone, please have a good night.